Okay. Okay, can I just ask everyone who's not speaking to please mute? This meeting is being recorded and it will be available online in a couple of days. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. This year, Arab World Books celebrates its 25th anniversary. As a pioneering cultural website in the Arab world, we've been actively promoting culture, diversity, and dialogue for a quarter of a century. I'm delighted to welcome a dear friend, Bob Bowker, to a new episode of our series, A Writer, a Vision, a Journey. These conversations aim to explore the motivation process and outcomes of a writer's journey and shed light on the values and experiences that are common to writers and readers across the world. Professor Bowker is an Australian diplomat and academic with 37 years of experience in the Arab region. He's the author of 6 books and numerous publications on Middle East issues. His most recent book is Tomorrow There Will Be Apricots, an Australian diplomat in the Arab world. In Arabic, بكرة في المشمش. As with every book of the month, I invite you to find on our website a compiled file that you can browse through, including his books, a collection of articles, as well as important links. Previous guests in this series were Reem Bassiouni, Sylvia Petter, Hal Al-Badri, Susan Tebergen, D.L. Nelson, Nihad Cerise, Karen Leggett Abu Raya, Sania Mehrez, Wallace Wild-Minozi, and Hussein Fakhr. In September, our guest will be Hartmut Fendrich, the renowned German translator. In August, we will be discussing Chinua Achebe's novel, Things Fall Apart, in our World Literature series in Arabic. All our episodes can be found on our YouTube channel. I will send the link to the channel on today's chat if anyone is interested. Egyptian author Mohammed Tawfiq will host and moderate this discussion. Thank you all for participating and have a great evening.
Thank you, Amani. Ambassador Bob Bowker, it's a great pleasure to have this conversation with you. Let me start by going back to from the beginning of your interest in the Arab world. We know that you've had a long and successful career as a diplomat, presenting Australia and the Arab world as an academic, trying to decipher and to explain the Arab world to a Western audience. And also you've had ample experience in the business sector, doing business in the Arab world. But first of all, why the Arab world? What is the reason for your interest in this particular part of the world?
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you, Amani. It's wonderful. I'm greatly honored to be on your program. It's not often that I have an opportunity to reconnect to my friends in Egypt, and this is a particularly wonderful opportunity for me to do so. To answer your question, I need to go back a little. When I came out of university, I was an Indonesian speaker, and I had spent some time in Indonesia during which I was exposed to Islam for the first time. And I was actually helping to deliver fuel oil around Sumatra, and the crew of the boat, of the ship, were Buginese, who were very devout Muslims. But then I went on to work on in Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur and followed political Islam there in the Malay community. So I had a general introduction to Islam in a practical sense in that way. But my engagement with the Middle East, which now goes actually about almost exactly 50 years now, began when, for purely professional reasons, I was asked to help open the Australian Embassy in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And as I think so often happens with the Arab world, when I went to Saudi and helped to open that embassy, I was struck by the things that make the Middle East so attractive as a professional and as a personal career path. I was struck by the warmth of the people with whom I was dealing, the sense that I was present at an important historical moment in '73, the repercussions of the oil embargo and so on that had to be worked through. I was young, and when you're young, you tend to encounter issues and you worry about the fact that there are no easy answers to be found to them. And when you combine that frustration with trying to find answers to problems with a deep appreciation of the people with whom you are engaging, then you tend to, I think, be channeled into a career that keeps you returning to the Middle East in the search for answers to some of those problems, and to maintain that level of contact with people whose histories and values and experiences are so very different to one's own. So that's what brought me to the Middle East. And after Jeddah, after Saudi, I served in Damascus. I was the Australian government liaison with the PLO. I led the first meeting with Arafat and so on. I later became ambassador in Jordan, and subsequent to that, worked with the United Nations, with UNRWA, for a while in Gaza and Jerusalem. Back to the Middle East, to Cairo as ambassador and accredited, back to various places, Sudan, Tunisia, Libya, and so on. So it's been a very wide experience of the Arab world, with something different in each place. And in many ways, it was more than a career for me. It was an adventure, and in many ways, it was my life.
You said an adventure. Obviously, an adventure that has lasted a long time and has produced many successes. You translated that adventure in the form of a number of books. Most of your books covered, some of them covered the Palestinian issue from the angle of refugees, also from the different angle of the prospects for peace, the evolution in the recent transformations in the Arab world. Most of these works take the objective academic angle, but your most recent book, there will be Apricots, which of course is a translation of the Egyptian expression filmishmish, takes a more cultural approach, a more personal approach with a twist of humor. So of course, I hope many of our viewers will actually get around to read some of your books, particularly the last one. Will you give us a little bit, some of the anecdotes that you described in your book, some of the experience of that the long experience that book conveys?
I actually chose the title of my memoirs, Bukra fil Mishmish, because I wanted to convey that sense of optimism and at the same time a certain skepticism among the people I have known in the Arab world about authority figures and people who presume to tell them how their lives ought to be lived. One of the things which I have always appreciated about my experience in the Arab world was the exposure to the human qualities that Arab societies embody. Generosity, a determination to maintain a sense of hospitality, a willingness to endure all sorts of difficulty, and to maintain a sense of dignity throughout very difficult circumstances. And so, whereas the popular media, for very good reason, tends to focus on conflict and issues of life-threatening consequence, I've always believed that it is more appropriate and certainly more productive in engaging with the Arab world to start from a positive perspective that these are societies, because there is no single Arab society, but these are societies that have a great deal to offer in terms of the values and the social cohesion that are part of being an Arab community. As far as the, you mentioned successes, I think I learned far more from my failures than from my successes. And somehow or other, my failures very often seem to revolve around sheep. Australia used to sell and still does sell a very large number of sheep into the Middle East. And there are very few ways of understanding how systems work that are better than trying to come to grips with problems in the live sheep trade. It used to get to a point where if I knew that a shipment of sheep was heading my way, whether it was to Jordan or to Egypt or to Syria, I would insist that Canberra, that the Australian government would tell me that they were coming so that I could get ready to deal with the consequences if a shipment went wrong, and it quite often did. One of those cases arose in Jordan, where the shipment had been rejected by Egypt for spurious reasons, and it made its way down to Aqaba, where once again, because it had been rejected by Egypt, the Jordanians felt obliged to reject this shipment of Australian sheep. And so the sheep sailed away, but somewhere off Fujairah in the Emirates, the sheep became Bulgarian, and they returned to Aqaba. They were the same sheep, but with a change of passport, and everything went smoothly from that point on. Another occasion, we had a group of Australians who were very concerned about the conditions under which Australian livestock were being slaughtered in Cairo. And very unusually, of course, for Egypt, someone dressed up as a sheep and tried to hold a demonstration outside my embassy. Fortunately, my consul got word of this, that this sheep person was about to arrive, and he was waiting downstairs as the fellow pulled up in a taxi, and he grabbed him and whisked him away into the embassy before Aman Adawla could grab him, which would have created a much more serious problem than any consignment of Australian sheep could ever have created in the bilateral relationship. So, as I say, I learned a great deal about how to operate in the Arab world and how not to operate through the medium of having to deal with the live sheep trade, and it was always entertaining. The sheep traders would compete with each other viciously, of course, but then on other days they would get together, and you'd see them all having lunch together. It was like having lunch with the Sopranos. It was quite an extraordinary experience trying to untangle the various threads and accusations and so on that would be trotted up on a daily basis.
Well, it's amazing the different experiences that diplomats from different countries have. I'm sure not many countries' diplomats would look at their jobs from the angle of the sheep trade, but it's certainly very interesting, and it's also illuminating to see how the different types of issues that diplomats have to grapple with, which also makes their job difficult but also interesting.
Well, one of the things that I quickly realized was that to be effective in the Arab context, the first thing that you really had to understand was how power worked in various societies. And whether it was in regard to the animal trade or assisting with dryland farming in Jordan, the critical thing was to understand who it was who would be responsible for making decisions, and secondly, who would be responsible for implementing those decisions, because they weren't always the same people. In Jordan, we had a dryland farming project that was designed in part to help prevent erosion of soil into the Zaka River. And we came to realize that when our consultants went to talk to the farmers, it was not the farmer who made a decision about which way he was going to plough his land to cause this erosion to take place, or to prevent the erosion taking place. Nor was it the owner of the land, who frankly was most likely to be living in Amman or Zarqa and not really very interested in how his land was being farmed. the person who was making the decisions was usually a contractor whose interest in this whole business was to maximize the speed with which he could plow that land and move on to his next project. Now, when the contractors used donkeys and plows, they had to plow along the contour, and there was very little soil erosion. But a contractor with a diesel-powered tractor would simply plow up and down the quickest way he possibly could and move on to the next job. And that was where the soil erosion problem arose. So it was only when you could understand that the need to persuade the contractors that there were better ways of and more responsible ways of behaving that you could actually start to address the problem. And in Cairo, we had a major problem with, in fact, I had to stop the export of live cattle to Egypt for a while because cattle were being slaughtered in most inhumane ways at the main Cairo slaughterhouse. And when I tried to find out why that was happening and who would be responsible for stopping it happening, it turned out that the municipality, which operated the abattoir, was leaving it to the butchers who slaughter the cattle. There was no supervision of the slaughtering. And so the butchers would get people to come and kill the animals without proper regard for the well-being of those animals in the slaughtering process. But to get the municipality to take a different approach would have been almost impossible, and to get the butchers to respect the municipality's wishes for more than a very brief period would have been equally unrealistic. So it's that sort of understanding of the dynamics of the society and how power and authority operate that I found intriguing to understand, but also professionally my responsibility to understand.
Yes, I remember well that episode with the cattle. I was stationed in Australia at the time.
Yes,
and,
yes.
And yes, it was quite a big issue, and you're right. It's part of any diplomat's job is to understand the mechanics of how decision making and power distribution happens in a society. But another angle which is important also from a diplomat's point of view is culture. To be able to, first of all, understand the cultural differences between his or her own culture and the countries in which they are operating, and first of all, to understand them in order to be able to better navigate them. So what in your experience are the differences, the main differences in approaches between Arab cultures in general and Australia?
I very quickly learnt how much variety there is in Arab societies and Arab cultures. And I've always been very wary about generalization about the Arab world beyond the obvious pride in the Arabic language and reference to Islam and a common cultural characteristic across the Arab world of valuing hospitality and cultural achievement and a sense of community as being a higher priority than the interest or the concerns of individuals within that society. But when you get beyond those very general levels, the thing that I think most Australians would not appreciate or understand is that Arab societies are really a collection of micro societies, which somehow or other manage to coexist quite well, despite an almost total lack of connectivity in some respects. A person who lives in Zamalek would have very little in common, would see themselves as having very little in common with someone from Bab el-Kalk. Or if you are a Jordanian and living in Amman, you're likely to make jokes about people in Tafileh, or Damascene will make jokes about Homsis and so on. Those are the sorts of variation and disconnection, if you like, that are quite, with which Australians are quite unfamiliar. We, with an important exception, which is the situation of Indigenous Australians, whose experiences are very different and whose concerns are very different to the majority of non-Indigenous Australians, with the exception of the Indigenous community. Australian society is remarkably homogeneous, even though we are one of the most migrant societies anywhere on the planet. I think 5 in every 7 Australians was either born outside Australia or has parents who was born outside Australia. So how we come to blend together and still be quite identifiably Australian is something of a mystery, but it is very, very much the case. And we don't have variations in accent on a regional basis. A Syrian can tell you in a matter of seconds where someone is from based on their accent. An Australian could not tell you if someone was from Tasmania or Queensland based on their accent. The difference in Australia is a reflection of education level or socioeconomic level, not of regional location. It's not a factor of geography. So those are the sorts of differences that that struck me in dealing with the Arab world. I'd also make the point that, and again, this is a more general comment about the Arab world, which is obviously contestable because of its variety. But I found that across the Arab world, from Sudan through to Libya, Syria, and parts of the Gulf, there was a collective memory of and a sense of grievance of a lengthy history of unequal and at times exploitative dealings with the West. And that shapes perceptions of the behavior and the commentary of Western countries and particularly the United States in ways that are quite unfamiliar to most non-Indigenous Australians. For Indigenous Australians, on the other hand, this sense of having a colonial experience is very powerful. and well justified as well. So that's how I would respond to your question about the differences that I found over the years in dealing with the Arab world compared to my own society.
You've opened up really so many different issues and topics, but maybe we'll come back to them during the discussion. Now let me move to a much wider angle, because everyone in the world today is conscious one way or another that the international system is changing very quickly, and that a new international system is coming into place. From an Australian angle, I imagine that would be an interesting, you would have an interesting way at looking at it, because part of the changes happening in the international system is a move from a Euro-Atlantic worldview in which wealth and the political struggle is happening in that area, to a more Indo-Pacific worldview. And Australia, of course, would be very much interested in that. So how do you see this transformation happening? How do you see the world? What will the world look like in 20 years from now?
Mohammed, if I could answer that question accurately, I would be a very unusual person, and I don't claim to have the capacity to answer your question well. I think I am sort of leaving this stage of my life with the sense that this is a time of perilous opportunity for the world. On the one hand, we have achieved the capacity to deal with issues that could not have been imagined 50 years ago. The acquisition of knowledge, the role of computers and artificial intelligence, the horizons of human ambition have risen so dramatically in the space of my lifetime that that is what I hope I will leave the world being pleased about. On the other hand, at the same time, I think we have developed the capacity to destroy ourselves. And we have a substantial risk that all that knowledge and capability that we have acquired may even hasten some of these dangerous tendencies. Perhaps they are part of human nature. Maybe we are bent on self-destruction as well as achievement. But right now, I think that particularly if we do not use our capabilities to surmount the challenges of climate change in particular, and the growing disparities of achievement and opportunity between different societies around the world, then the achievements that we have made may prove to be very fragile indeed. I have 3 great-grandchildren. I have 5 grandchildren, and every time I see them, my heart is glad because I can see in these people and these children qualities that will, I think, help to produce a better world. I just hope they have the opportunity, or they have the time to address those problems in socially responsible ways. Because if they can, if the system allows them that opportunity, I will die optimistic. But that's really all I can suggest to you, I'm afraid.
I think you're referring to the challenges that we're facing collectively as a human race. We've seen, for example, the COVID pandemic and how that was able to impact everyone on the planet very simply. And nowadays, it's impossible for anyone not to have noticed climate change and the issues of the environment. We're just a couple of days ago, the Secretary General of the United Nations was speaking about the catastrophic situation we're in with regard to climate change. And a few days ago, actually, the United Nations Security Council was discussing whether artificial intelligence represents a threat to humanity. So certainly these issues are serious issues, and everyone, not just the experts or specialists, everyone now is very much aware of. But at the same time, we're seeing that the international system is moving more towards a great power confrontation, great power game of nations, and so on. And which is not new, but what is new is for this new international system to be taking place at the same time as we have all these very serious threats. So do you think that these two elements can coexist in a way that we can have great power competition, but at the same time a greater capacity to coordinate efforts and deal with these issues? Or is this simply a self-destructive path that the world is taking?
I'm old enough to remember the Cold War very well. And I am delighted to see a new order emerging in which all those wasted opportunities that arose from competition between the United States and the Soviet Union imposed upon the rest of the world. A change to an international environment in which more countries are empowered to pursue their national interests and make their own choices, whether we may be comfortable with those choices or not, is still a better world than one which is shaped by issues peculiar to two countries alone. And one of the things which gives me some hope for the international system going forward is that we are able now to form coalitions on specific issues, be it climate or COVID, or issues to do with artificial intelligence and so on, and discuss these questions in a meaningful way with a view to developing outcomes that can be widely shared, even if you don't ultimately get a consensus. There will be progress in desirable directions because countries are able to talk frankly with each other about how their interests are being shaped by these concerns. I'm like you, I'm sure, concerned that recent trends, particularly under the Trump administration in the United States, but also the behavior of the Russians in regard to Ukraine, are severely undermining the capacity of like-minded countries to work comfortably with each other in the United Nations context, which remains the most appropriate context in which to address multilateral problems. Egypt and Australia are both players in the multilateral system. We don't always agree. Some of the debates between Egypt and Australia over the renewal of the NPT achieved almost legendary status in Australia. But at the end of the day, we both respect each other's views, and we each want to work toward making the international system more productive, not only because it makes us feel good about ourselves, but because it protects our interests better than any other system or absence of a system out there. So I think we will find that some of the tendencies which are in evidence right now will self-correct over time because our interests will be so badly damaged if the multilateral system is set aside by those who currently have a very narrow approach to other people's concerns.
It's heartening to listen to someone who still believes in the multilateral system, and also it's good to find your cautiously optimistic tone. I certainly hope I share your point of view on this matter. Let's go back to the Arab world and the Middle East. How do you see this evolution in the international system? How do you think that will impact the Middle East? What does the future of the Middle East look like from your end?
Well, I think we could talk about this for at least a week, but I think the first thing I would say is that the principal challenges that faced the Arab world 20 years ago and that were identified by Arab intellectuals in the Arab Human Development Report series are still there. We and I once I get started, I start to speak in the plural. I'm please forgive me for that, but I don't think we have found the answers to those problems yet. And while those problems continue, the larger global challenges of climate change in particular are looming ever more as a factor which will limit the capacity of the Arab world to surmount some of these challenges. And in addition to the problems of education and development and gender empowerment and so on that were identified by Arab intellectuals 20 years ago, we now have issues about biosecurity, health security, artificial intelligence, all these issues that are adding complications to what is still fundamentally a problem which Arab governments are having difficulty addressing. Some are addressing those, but very few have, I think, succeeded in capturing the imagination and the vision and the energy and the capabilities of the younger generation of an increasingly well-educated, well-connected, thoughtful younger generation. And that is, I think, giving that generation an opportunity to have a meaningful voice in decisions that affect its future is probably the path that will optimize the chances of the Arab world surmounting these challenges. Now, I'm fully aware, I'm aware, maybe not as aware as I should be, but I'm certainly aware that there are risks attached to empowerment. Whether one assumes that empowerment will automatically lead to social progress and welfare and balanced economic development, that's a pretty heroic assumption to make. But the risks that are involved, that are attached to not empowering a younger generation, I think far outweigh the possibility that the relationship between state and society as perceived by a younger generation will prove to be threatening for those who currently enjoy privilege. I mean, those are large and I think brave comments to make, and please forgive me for sounding like an outsider talking about things which Arabs have been, so say, thinking and worrying about for at least 2 decades, to my knowledge, and probably well before. But I fear that, and I don't offer advice, I'm merely observing. I'm telling you what I observe. And what I observe is that some Arab states, some Arab governments will cope better with these challenges than others. And that those that do not respond through empowerment are more likely to lose the capacity to galvanize that youth and enthusiasm and so on. And the end result of that will be that those who are currently the poor, the ill-educated, those who are, in the case of many Syrians now who are stateless, those will be the people who will suffer. Those who enjoy privilege in the Arab world will not suffer unduly from a continuation of the existing system, even if there are opportunity costs involved. But those who are at the lowest end of the socio-economic scale, they are the ones who I think will be left behind and may never have the opportunity to enjoy the realization of their potential.
Again, you've opened up so many different topics that I'm sure will come up in later on in the discussion. Most of our participants will not be very much will not be very knowledgeable about Australia. So can you give us a quick analysis, a quick just picture Australia, and where is Australia heading in the quickly evolving international scene?
I think at the international level, Australia, as you said earlier, is very much focused on the shift of global power and the dynamism of the Asia-Pacific, or the Indo-Pacific, as people like to refer to it, of which Australia is obviously a significant part. We have the absolute closest of relations, of course, with the United States, historically, and in terms of our strategic alliances with them and so on. But our economy, and in many ways our society, is shaped by the economic growth of East Asia. Our markets are primarily in East Asia. Our investment is largely from the United States and from Europe, but increasingly also from China and India and elsewhere. And if I look 20 or 30 years ahead, then surely the demographic composition of Australia is going to be much more attuned to the Asia-Pacific than it is to our European non-Indigenous heritage. So we are at a moment where we need to reconcile between a security concern about how Australia's interests can be protected and preserved in the context of a changing and sometimes troubled relationship between the United States and China. And on the other hand, our concern to see economic growth maximized in East Asia, because that is where our economic interests also depend, and ultimately the well-being of our society depends. Now, the Australian government recently has, or under the previous government, but endorsed by the current one, has opted to strengthen the security relationship with the United States and with Britain as well, in ways that will have a very enduring impact upon our defence structure. We will acquire nuclear-powered submarines in the fullness of time, and certainly all the activities that must be undertaken in support of that program will have a very significant impact upon how we structure our defence force. But we need to see that as something which requires explanation, if you like, particularly to our ASEAN neighbours who are not comfortable with us moving in this direction. They are polite enough to, I think, keep their concerns expressed in the most moderate and gentle of language. But I think many of them would much prefer to avoid a situation where they are being asked to choose between how they wish to manage their relationship with Australia and the United States on the one hand, or with China on the other. And I think there's a lot to be said for stronger Australian consultation with Indonesia in particular as the major power in Southeast Asia about how exactly these new defence arrangements are meant to work in conjunction with and in support of ASEAN and Indonesia's own priorities and concerns. So I'd like to see a clear focus, a clear diplomatic focus on addressing that need for clarity and communication, which I don't think it may be happening, but it's certainly not in the public domain in the way that I would like it to be now.
Well, this is, again, opens up a whole new world of thinking, really, a little bit far away from where most of us are located right now. Finally, final question, since this website is all about books. Are you writing any books now? And what is the book that you'd really love to write?
Oh, thank you, Mohammed. Before I answer that, I might just also add that the Indo-Pacific is coming to you. I think, tend not to, when say we, I think Australians and many others fail to recognise the centrality of the Persian Gulf to the Indo-Pacific. It is absolutely critical to the stable economic performance of East Asia. The sea lines of communication from the Persian Gulf and through the Malacca Straits and so on are significant global arteries of trade. They have a direct bearing on Australia's well-being as well. And the Persian Gulf is historically, demographically, culturally, politically connected.
At 7 p.m.
Connected to the Indian Ocean and beyond. Any sensible approach to strengthening the security and the prosperity of the Indo-Pacific should take at least as much account of the potential rewards and the risks that arise from the future of the Persian Gulf. As far as books are concerned, I really don't think I have anything new or interesting to say about the Arab world. I'm an old Middle East war horse. I'm turned out to pasture. I think I've pretty much nothing new to add. I have a little bit of work to do on historical issues of the Suez crisis. I wrote 2 books about Australia and Suez, and I have to finish a little bit on that. But in fact, in the last year or so, I spent my time writing a history of my family's presence on a farm in Victoria, where it has lived now for 7 generations, and which is unusual in Australia to have one family on one farm for 7 generations. And writing that as a social history of Victoria, and how individuals who were not distinguished, and some were successful and some were not. It's a warts and all story of the family, if you like, but it does at least put them in a historical context. They were witnesses to history if they weren't actually part of it, from gold rushes through rabbit plagues to all sorts of things. And having written that, I'm now thinking of writing a historical novel, drawing on some of these characters for a bit of fun, really, with the odd shipwreck and a few other things thrown in, because once again, we seem to if we weren't involved with sheep, we were involved with shipwrecks. So
I certainly look forward to reading that one. Certainly, I think you've opened up so many subjects. I think that your comments have been extremely illuminating. Maybe it's time to open up the discussion. Who would like to start? Yes, Yusuf Wash. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad. Well, I don't have a question, but a small story. I had an opportunity to attend an event more than 10 years ago in South Sinai, where the Australian embassy was involved. And at that time, I think the ambassador was a lady. So one of my friends, he is a manager of an organization which offers services to Bedouins in South Sinai. And at that time, the Australian embassy donated a well to one of the villages. And I attended the event. And also, I think the Australian ambassador attended. And it was a big celebration with the camel racing and Bedouin lunch.
Very good.
Like a festival. And the well is a big well, and it helped great area in South Sinai for agriculture and drinking and other services.
Yeah.
So this is the story which I wanted to tell on this.
Shukran jazilan. I'm pleased to know that you were able to attend. The provision of assistance by embassies is something which obviously used to give me a lot of satisfaction, but I had to be very careful in understanding the context in which assistance was offered, because sometimes, especially in Upper Egypt, you could find some awkward situations if you did not understand who exactly you were dealing with and how the community as a whole perceived this activity. But I'm glad that in South Sinai there was a successful project. That is very good news.
Are you aware of this project or event?
No, I'm not. I'm not. It was after my time. I finished in Cairo in 2008, so 15 years ago now.
Thank you.
Dr. Naya Ibrahim, go ahead.
Unmute. Bo, thank you very much for the nice presentation, and Muhammad, Ambassador Muhammad also gave us a new global entitled about Euro-Atlantic move to Indo-Pacific. This is the first time to be encountered with this global statement. My question is about, usually if I want to approach any administrative step toward Australia, I have to make a contact through United Arab Emirates as a central region that can help us to exchange documents or get approval or for a work or such a thing. And in this path, how to make communication easier between Egypt and Australia, especially that when you mentioned in your speech that the centricity of Persian Gulf area is your core from the Australian point of view. So there will always be a barrier. This Middle East Gulf area, and it will be considered a barrier between us and you. How? This is from my perspective. And from a trial, I tried before to get a job as a hematologist in one of your areas there in Australia. So you're very far away. what I want to say. You are so far away. How to make this easier through communications, through culture, especially that you are not focusing on that. You are focusing on the Persian Gulf region. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not familiar with the way in which applications are processed now, and I do expect that much of that activity is being focused on a regional center, such as Abu Dhabi or Dubai, which may account for some of the delays that you've been experiencing. But if it is something which is urgent, it is always worth giving a phone call to the embassy in Cairo and asking the consular staff if they can assist, because at least in my time, and I think many of the same people are still there 15 years on, because they are like the pyramids, they will always be there. I'm sure that they will be helpful if you contact them directly.
Let me add to that, that nowadays, a lot of the communications are happening through the internet. So a lot of the stuff is happening. You don't need to go through the embassy. You can do it directly, particularly if you're talking about immigration issues. You do that directly through the internet with the Australian authorities. So this issue, I'm aware of this issue in which a lot of the immigration issues and visa issues are processed not through the embassy in Cairo, but through Dubai. But nowadays, I think some of these issues you can do directly with the Australian authorities.
Doesn't make it any easier though.
Does this have any connection that Egypt have been dominated by the British colonization and culture for a long time, and Australia is just getting it's a continent of emerging continent speaking English, trying to have its own identity out away from Britain, especially that was mentioned in the Crown Syrian, that Australian people like Diana, they didn't like the Queen Elizabeth, and they like the new generation more. They represent more the Australian characters and the Australian people and the Australian emotions and the Australian family. I think there is a historical barrier here from what I noticed in Crown. Thank you.
I find that across the countries where I have worked, one of the assets that Australian diplomacy has is that we are not seen in the region as having any political agendas or historical baggage with the region. We have always been seen as a reliable trading partner, especially with wheat and even our sheep. And increasingly, as Arabs have become familiar with Australia, we are seen as a source of education and opportunities to exchange experience in agriculture and so on. So really, as a diplomat, we in Australia are privileged in our dealings with the region compared to my American colleagues or some of the others who have a whole range of other issues that people think about when they are dealing with those other countries. So I've always found myself thinking how fortunate I was to be representing Australia rather than some of these others.
Yeah, I think an important element is that the environment in Australia is similar to that in the Arab world. Australia is mostly desert, and one of the main issues it has is the issue of water resources, and most of the citizens of Australia are located in the coastal area. So in terms of cooperation, there are many opportunities for cooperation with the Arab world. Agriculture, of course, is one, which is very important. Desert tourism, because Australia is very advanced in the area of desert tourism. And of course, in the Arab world, this is one of the areas which we need to promote. Minerals, how to
absolutely
manage, yeah, exactly, how to manage your mineral wealth and how to encourage investments in mineral extracting and all that. Australia is one of the most successful countries in that regard. So certainly there are different, there's a lot of room for cooperation with Australia. I wonder, Bob, if you want to give us your insights into this area of mineral extraction, not the specifics, but in general, what the Arab world needs to do in order to promote international interest in extracting minerals, apart, of course, from oil and gas.
Thanks. In fact, in Egypt, we have a very successful case of cooperation between an Australian company and the Egyptian authorities that led to the creation of the first modern gold mine in Egypt at Sukari, down near Marsa Alam. And that mine, which produces about 500,000 ounces of gold a year now, and divides the profits equally between Egypt and the Australian company, was established. The company was established, and the operation was established by an Egyptian Australian, Sami Raghi, who was from Alexandria originally, trained as a geologist or mining engineer, I forget which, a geologist. Went to Australia, but always wanted to come back and have a go at mining in a place which had been disregarded by the British and by the Russians as being non-commercial. And Sammy looked at this opportunity and said, look, I'll do this the Australian way. We'll dig a very large open cut mine, and we will do an underground to access the high grade ore while we are doing the other low grade ore on a bulk basis. And it proved to be a very successful model. But Sammy, or Mr. El-Raghi, had to spend a very long time, several years, explaining what he wanted to do to the Egyptian government. And eventually there had to be legislation passed for him to, for the project to go ahead. And in the meantime, the Egyptian government signed dozens of mining agreements with various countries, but there were never any mines. And the reason for that was that Egypt kept to an out-of-date mining code, which made Egypt uncompetitive internationally in trying to attract the large-scale companies that are capable of putting together the money and the skills required to develop a large-scale mine. Now, alhamdulillah, we now have a situation where Egypt has updated its mining code. And you are, for the first time, getting serious international investment in gold production in Egypt. And you would have as much gold in Egypt, we understand, as we have in Western Australia or Ontario. It is an enormous potential area of growth for Egypt with this new mining code, which is based on taxation rather than production sharing, which is the old model. Now, looking beyond Egypt, the same mineralization that exists in the eastern desert of Egypt exists in Saudi Arabia. It's all part of the same structure. And so the Saudis are very keen now to exploit copper and gold and other minerals with a modern mining code. And I think we'll see a great deal more Australian activity in the mining sector in those areas. But could I just coming back to your earlier very wise comment about opportunities to share experience. One of the areas which I'm pleased to say Australia contributed in regard to the mining operation at Sakatti was that it was basically, without speaking too much out of school, it was Centamin that showed, or consultants for Centamin, an Egyptian consultant for Centamin, that showed the Egyptian authorities how best to manage the environmental impact of this new mining venture. And as a result of that genuine collaboration and respectful interaction, you now have a capacity in Egypt to evaluate environmental impacts of mining projects, which will stand you in very good stead when you're dealing with the other companies that are now actively seeking opportunities in Egypt. So it's I think an example of how, although we are a long way from each other, we have areas of common interest or potential, we can work together very well.
Well, I think that's definitely a good way of looking towards the future, looking for areas of cooperation, areas in which both sides will win. Any other comments or questions? We still have a couple of minutes, so let me ask you, Bob, about the role of Arab Australian communities. We know we have a large Lebanese community, a large Iraqi community, a large Egyptian community in Australia. And certainly you mentioned in the case of Centamin, but I'm sure there are other different cases in which the Arabs in the diaspora in Australia, they can function as a bridge between us. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the first generation of Arab migrants to Australia had very little direct connection back to the countries from which they left, be they Egypt or Lebanon or Iraq or Syria. But their children is a different story. We are now seeing much greater interest in their cultural heritage and a desire to represent what it means to be young and Arab and progressive in representing their culture in Australian society. And so, whereas and the non-Indigenous Australian society also has become accustomed to people who from Arab backgrounds in their midst. So, for example, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was a little bit of anxiety in the Australian community about wearing hijab. Now, nobody cares. Absolutely nobody could care how you dress within the bounds of decency. You can wear whatever you like and no one will care. And that's, I think, a reflection of the way in which Arab migrants to Australia have been very effective in both career terms, as professionals, as skilled people in various ways, but also because they simply have made a contribution, a distinctive contribution, which is respected by other people in the community. So I think it's a very positive experience for Australia. There'll always be some elements who historically have been problematic, but no country is immune from that. And if I look across the board at the success of Iraqis and Syrians and Egyptians in Australia, it's a very positive story. And I'm personally, of course, very, very proud and pleased at that.
Yeah, I think that's an important issue, but it's for basically most countries. I mean, for a country like Egypt, we have about 10 million Egyptians living all over the world, but we also have 10 million foreigners living in Egypt. So this movement of populations around the world is becoming very salient in how this world is being shaped, and this probably will continue. Any comments, any questions to Ambassador Bob Bowker?
Can I add a comment, please?
Please.
Because I was just swimming with a geologist a few days ago, and he told me that geologists see the facts in a better way than any other scientist. All people are afraid from the dam that has been built in Ethiopia, and geologists see this as an opportunity when you talk about desert, because when you fill the dam to the 4th level, it gives the historical pathways underground to be valid for the underwater to run. So this would be a very, very precious way of cooperation. If Ethiopia insists on filling the dam to the 4th level, it will give us opportunity to take from their money from underground. So this is a field of expertise. If Australia is good in it, and they can help us in the east side of Egypt, because I noticed now that there is an international division of interest, and America is taking the west side, so why not you search in the east side? We want this water. If we can take from the dam, please help us here. Thank you.
I'm sure that it's an issue that ought to be discussed between Egypt and Ethiopia and Sudan. And really, there is no resolution to the water issue through conflict. It can only be resolved through technical discussions in the first instance, and then some hard bargaining at the political level, which will happen anyway. But yes, it's nice to know that there is a technical element to this that that could actually be beneficial to all sides.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, and thank you all for this this very illuminating discussion. I think Ambassador Bob Bowker has given us new insights and has also opened up many avenues for further thought, further discussion. But we have come to the end of our time and for the end of this session. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Ambassador Bob Bowker, and we look forward to your participation in our coming seminars.
Thank you. I'm much appreciative of the opportunity, and I am especially grateful that so many people wanted to join in this conversation with me. And Wallah Sharafna, it was wonderful to have this opportunity. Thank you.